What happens when a man is taught that desire is sin, that women are either saints or vixens, and that his own body reactions are not something to be understood, but something to be fought against? You don't get holiness, you get violence, you get obsession. But more importantly, what you get is a trail of ruined women left behind in the name of virtue. Today, we are talking about The Monk by Matthew Lewis, one of the most disturbing, shocking, and haunting Gothic novels that I have ever read, and how it perfectly encompasses the Madonna-whore complex, sexual repression, and the dangers of moral absolutism. Hello, my gorgeous viewers and readers. I hope your weekend was filled with Christmas work parties, too much mulled wine, and at least one questionable decision that will haunt you forever. I have just finished reading The Monk by Matthew Lewis, and honestly, this is one of the most haunting and terrifying, but also incredibly intellectual Gothic novels that I have ever read. This was published in 1796, and honestly, it was so scandalous, but I completely understand why. Because this is not a subtle book. This is obscene, violent, almost blasphemous, more specifically because of how it portrays women, desire, and sex. This is why this book is so important and why it is so deeply uncomfortable. And the biggest example of all of this is actually Ambrosio, who is the main character of the book. Do you want to know how? Let's start. For those who haven't read the book, The Monk follows Ambrosio, who is the main character of the book and who is also a Capuchin monk living in Madrid. He is considered the paragon of virtue, right? He is pure, he always has God in his mind, and also he is a God-fearing person. He's always viewed as this example to follow when it comes to believing in God and into religiousness, right? Into living this path that God wants us to have. He was also raised entirely within the walls of a monastery, so he hasn't had any sort of contact with women or people from the other sex, right? Until he is revealed, or it is revealed to him, that someone amongst the monastery walls is actually a woman, which is Rosario, who is his best friend, or his very close monk friend. But actually, Rosario is not a man, but a woman who is called Matilda. Matilda is initially presented as this pure and virginal woman, right? Someone who is like Ambrosio, someone who just has this pure in her love, but also someone who just cares about God more than anything else, right? She explains very clearly that she has feelings for Ambrosio, but actually she doesn't want to act on them because she cares about God and she cares about her journey to become a godly woman more than anything else. And she also cares about her friendship with Ambrosio more than her own life herself, right? She is presented as this Madonna or as this Virgin Mary, in contrast of what Ambrosio has always felt or thought about women who are the devil or who are the weak sex. Until Ambrosio unfortunately realizes that what he feels for Matilda is not actually the friendship that he felt for Rosario, but actually this very deep and dark sexual desire. At the start, he tries to let it go and just to be the God-fearing man that he has always been, but unfortunately, he can't contain his emotions and his desire, and then very quickly gets entangled into a sexual relationship with Matilda. And from then onwards, all this sexual desire that has been pent up over the years actually get released into a mass form, right? He not only has desires for Matilda, but also for another woman called Antonia, or another girl, I would say, because she is a minor. But yeah, he has all these crazy, obsessive sexual desires that he cannot control, but he is also ashamed of. And we see how his morality quickly collapses. This uncontrollable lust turns into obsession, which slowly turns into him becoming more and more evil and wicked by the page. There are also some parallel stories, like the story of Antonia and the story of Agnes, which also show us the other side of the coin, right? It shows us how women actually suffer the consequences of this uncontrollable lust that men have towards women, more specifically towards young women who are not aware of the world, but also who cannot control this sense or this desire to feel loved. There are many topics that we could be discussing that appear in this book, like, for example, religious hypocrisy or the use of mysticism within the book. But the two topics that I want to focus on and that I will be discussing in this video are temptation and lust, and then sexual repression. Starting with temptation and lust, this is actually one of the most striking topics in the book, because what I see from Lewis, or at least the vibe that I got, is the fact that temptation or the sin of lust isn't something that is intrinsically external or that is evil, but something that is created within us because of all the repression that we experience growing up. It's all the parts of the culture that actually make us go inwards and that creates shame within us. For example, in the book, Ambrosio isn't tempted because he is inherently wicked. He actually feels this temptation and this lust because he has no prior framework of what desire actually is, right? He doesn't understand what sexual desire is. Like, he doesn't realize that this is something that is inherently biological within us, and that is something that the vast majority of us experience. But he has thought that this desire is actually the sin of lust. This temptation that he feels is monstrous, is shameful, is something that he has to be not only ashamed of, but also that he has to fear. So when it inevitably emerges, he actually tries to control it and tries to keep it within himself. And unfortunately, the more you try to hide this desire, or the more you try to hide it within yourself and oppress it, the stronger and more powerful it becomes. Suddenly, it's not desire that you feel, it's actually an obsession. It becomes something that you obsess over, right? You can't eat, you can't drink, you can't think, you can't pray, because all you think about is this uncontrollable desire that you feel, that is burning hot within your body, right? And suddenly you don't have desire, you don't have lust, you have a fixation and something that you need to act over. What is most important about this topic is the fact that temptation is never framed as mutual, right? Because in Ambrosio's mind, what we see is that these desires and temptations are directed towards two people specifically, which are Matilda and then Antonia, right? We see how in Ambrosio's mind, these two characters initially, they are just pure virginal characters, right? They are characters that are tempting him. They are not two people who can also feel desire or who can also feel temptation, but they are objects of his desire, right? He is not meant to have a normal sexual relationship with them, but they are objects that are tempting him. They are things that he has to conquer. And all of this is rooted in the second topic, which is sexual repression, which I actually think is the real villain in The Monk, right? Because if we see Ambrosio's mind, or in Ambrosio's mentality, sex is not something that can ever be natural or consensual or shared. It's something that is deeply shameful. It's something that strips out his virtue and that makes him no longer pure, right? It's something that he has to hide, and it's something that obsesses him. Because for him, the moment he gives into his desires or into his temptations, he is no longer pure. Therefore, no one else is if they have given into these desires as well, right? There is no virtue in having sex, at least for him, right? That's not something that I believe, but obviously that's something that Ambrosio does. And I see how he also views sex within others, right? The moment Matilda has sex with him, then he cannot respect Matilda anymore because she is not the pure woman, the pure Madonna that he fell in love with. Or same thing with Antonia, right? Like, he doesn't feel any sort of respect for people who have sex or people who have these desires, because the moment he does, he loses his own virtue and his own respect for himself. And this part is key to understand the book, because what the author is trying to say here is not that repression ends desire. What he is trying to say is that actually what repression does is deform these temptations, is deform desire. It makes it obsessive and it makes it weak. It makes it dark. And the best example of this is Ambrosio's violence, right? Because all this violence is rooted or is born because of the temptation, desire, and lust that he feels, right? It's something that is so shameful to have that he feels violent and that he feels anger towards these emotions, right? Then he translates all these emotions that he feels, or like he puts the guilt onto the women that he desires, right? And that is exactly what we're teaching men and young boys, or like what the system and patriarchy is doing, right? They are told that all these feelings that they have are not only shameful, but also a woman's fault, right? And then it also shows them that they are entitled to women's bodies, to release these desires, but also that women themselves are the ones that are at fault, because we are the ones that are tempting them, and this is not something that they have to naturally experience. Which makes me think about one of my favorite theories in feminism, which is the Madonna-whore complex, right? And Ambrosio is the best example for that, right? We see how Ambrosio's mindset or Ambrosio's opinion of a woman completely changes or varies depending on if he had sex with her or not, right? We see how at first both Matilda and Antonia, and also the Virgin Mary, are very pure and virginal, right? They have this Madonna status, right? They are not only the object of his desires, but also they are something that has to be protected, that is so pure, that is almost divine and angelical, right? It's something that he desires with all his might, because that is something that not only he views as the goals, right? That's something that he wants to be, but also something that he wants to have for himself. It's something that he wants to own, but also that he wants to profane. Because Ambrosio doesn't view women as people. He doesn't view them as sexual objects, right? He views as these Madonnas as something that is untamed, something that is untouched, and something that is sacred, right? But the moment these women, or these two women like Matilda and Antonia, the moment they have sex, they become impure, they become vixens, they become these witches that have ruined him, that have made him not only sin, but also get into these sort of desires that he cannot control. Suddenly, they are not Madonnas anymore, they are whores. And whores are disposable, right? He immediately loses interest in these two characters. They are not something that he desires, because what he desired was the purity, right? He desired this sense of untouched, of sacredness, right? The moment he touches them, they become dirty. They become something that he doesn't want anymore and that he can dispose, right? And this is exactly why I say that Ambrosio has this duality with women, right? They are either Madonnas or they are whores. There is no in between, because the moment they become sexual, they are suddenly something that he does not desire. They are something dirty, because they serve the same purpose, or they have the same feelings that he despises, which is this temptation, this lust, and this desire that he wants to get rid of. And this is why Ambrosio's lust is inseparable with destruction, right? Because the moment he has sex with these women, he stops venerating them, or he stops seeing them as sacred or as people, and then they become objects of desire, objects that make him tempt, and also objects that he can use and dispose, right? Because he wants to corrupt these women. He doesn't want to have an intimacy or like an intimate relationship. He just wants to profane what is sacred. That is something that gets him off, right? That is the center of his temptation. And then once this profanity or once this corruption occurs, then he feels disgust. He doesn't feel intimacy. And here is where we get exposed with the brutal clarity. Men who divide women within sinners or saints will eventually punish them both. And this is exactly why I say that The Monk is one of the best representations of Gothic literature that we have in the West, or at least that I have ever read. Because what this book represents is that sexual temptation or sexual repression actually doesn't generate virtue, it actually creates monsters. Because this book actually asks us two questions. The first one is how much violence has been committed in the name of purity, but more importantly, how many women have been sacrificed under the name of men's desires. And this is why The Monk is so fascinating, but also so grotesque and disturbing, because it doesn't hide away from religious hypocrisy. It actually makes us stare directly at it. That's all for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you liked this review, and also that you give The Monk a chance if you haven't read it yet. But if you have, I have a question for you. What do you think of Ambrosio's behavior? Do you think the same as me, or do you think that this violence is rooted in something different? Let me know in the comments. I would love to know your opinion. Obviously, let's debate, but be friendly. And also, you can follow me on my social media. I post there every day. But yeah, that's all for today, guys. Again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I will see you soon. Bye, guys.